welcome. My name is Riki Okanda, and I am not an AI generation. This marks the beginning of a series on Christianity in Japan, which I am making for the sake of my own interest, and because there seem to be very few English language video sources on the matter that have been concisely compiled. The names, dates, and places I introduce in this series will generally be in light passing, so please look into any of the given topics if you would like to know more. I intend to elaborate further on the said topics myself in future videos whenever I have time. Being the first video in this series, I will now give a quick timeline of the major events associated with Christianity in Japan until today. Once again, I reiterate that this is a very quick explanation indeed, and glosses over all the important whys. The history of Christianity in Japan begins in the 16th century, which we can refer to as the Christian century. This was when Christianity was first introduced and flourished, but then became intertwined with politics and a notoriously mad daimyo. In 1549, Jesuit missionary Francis Xavier arrived in Kagoshima, marking the introduction of Christianity to Japan. He begins preaching and converting locals, particularly in Kyushu, or southwest Japan. Note that this comes on the heels of the Council of Trent in 1545 and during the heyday of the Age of Exploration. At this time, the newcomers and new religious and cultural ideas were welcomed into Japan wholeheartedly. For the next 30 years, Christianity spread rapidly, especially among daimyo, which are feudal lords, and peasants in Kyushu and parts of Honshu, the large island slightly north. Some of the significant daimyo were Otomo Sorin, Omura Sumitada, and Arima Harunobu. Jesuit missionaries, followed by Franciscans and Dominicans, established churches, schools, and hospitals. However, in 1587, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Japan's de facto ruler, issues an edict banning Christian missionaries. At this point, he is fearing their influence and foreign interference. One must understand that this is in the context of other religious problems in Japan, such as with the Buddhists, who were engaging in heavy revolt against Toyotomi. He saw Christianity as yet another potential thorn in his side. The pressure on organized religion intensified slowly, however. I would like to point out as an aside that famously Christian daimyo Omura Sumitada and Otomo Sorin both died of illness in 1587, only slightly before the edict was issued. This timing is a fascinating topic of political intrigue on which I will later expound during another video. To continue though, 10 years later, in 1597, there was a heavy-handed and symbolic crackdown in a very public and iconic way. 26 martyrs of Japan, including Japanese converts and foreign missionaries, were crucified in Nagasaki as a warning against Christianity. The 17th century is the century of persecution and suppression, which is most important in understanding why Christianity effectively disappeared from the country at a key turning point. Many incidents of political intrigue and upheaval in Game of Thrones style was happening at this point in history, and Christians were often at the center. In 1610, Christian daimyo Arima Harunobu sank a Portuguese ship in retaliation for an attack on his traders in Macau, in which 50 of his own samurai died. The circumstances around this sinking of the Madre de Deus ship warranted the return of lands belonging to his territory by Ieyasu, which the warlord shunned. Arima then teamed up with historical friend and fellow Christian Okamoto Daihachi to petition for these lands. But, notoriously, the 1612 Okamoto Daihachi incident came of this. It's a complicated story involving backstabbing, forgery, bribery, and all the exciting elements of feudal Japan, but the long story short is that Tokugawa Ieyasu was very mad indeed. And as a direct result, in 1614 the shogun issues a nationwide ban on Christianity, ordering the expulsion of all missionaries and the apostasy of converts. Churches are destroyed, and the persecution intensifies. The 1620s to the 1630s saw severe crackdowns continuing under the Tokugawa shogunate. Christians are forced to renounce their faith or face torture and execution. The fumie practice, stepping on Christian images to prove apostasy, is introduced. For those of you familiar with either the book or film Silence, a story by Endo Shusaku called Chinmoku in Japanese, and made into films by both directors Shinoda Masahiro and Martin Scorsese, this is the era in which that takes place. From 1637 to 1638, the Shimabara Rebellion, occurred on the grounds of oppression, taxes, and famine, and was led by some 20,000 to 30,000 peasants who were largely Christian. It was completely crushed by the Tokugawa shogunate. The rebellion is used then to justify further suppression, and Christianity is driven underground. In the 1640s, Japan adopted the Sakoku policy, completely banning foreign influence and contact. The very foreign and very troublesome excuse of Christianity is effectively eradicated on the surface, but the famed Kakure Kirishitan, hidden Christians, secretly maintain their faith in remote areas, particularly in Kyushu. So, from the 17th to the 19th centuries, we have a so-called dark era of underground survival. So 1640s all the way to the 1850s, Kakure Kirishitan, or the hidden Christians, practiced their faith in secret, blending Christian beliefs with Buddhist or Shinto rituals in order to avoid detection. They passed down prayers and traditions orally, often without priests or any scriptures. This was a grand number of people, as in the 19th century, some 20 to 30,000 people revealed themselves to be such. Such a long time had taken place, and with such extreme secrecy, that the religion had developed a different thing than the initially practiced Catholicism of the early years. For example, in Buddhism, certain chants are recited based on the bastardization of sounds from the originally conveyed Sanskrit. The same thing happened here, where prayers were disguised as Buddhist chants, but were an amalgamation of Japanese, Portuguese, Latin, and Spanish instead. In addition, no Bibles existed, so the texts were conveyed orally, leading to distortions over time. The Kakure Kirishitans are a fascinating topic in themselves, on which I hope to expound in a future video. But let's jump forward to the 1850s, when Christianity now had an opportunity to emerge and reconnect. So, in 1853, American Commodore Matthew Perry's fleet arrived and forced Japan to open up to the west by 1854, provisionally ending Sakoku. Foreign missionaries began to return 5 years later, as of 1859. The first to arrive this time, though, were not Catholics as before, but Protestants and Orthodox Christians. Significant names of the first to arrive were Guido Verbeck, a Protestant Dutch-American, James Hepburn, a Presbyterian who also created the first standardized Romanization system for the Japanese language, Samuel Brown, a Protestant who first translated the Bible into Japanese, and Nikolai Kasatkin, a Russian Orthodox. The first official visit of the Catholic Church, since their early visits were understandably wary, was in 1860 by Frenchman Pierre Ossoff. Note that these arrivals did not initially allow Christian missionaries free rein. They were very confined to the limited areas foreigners were permitted to live and trade. The 19th century is all about the revival of Christianity and the challenges it faces and continues to face today. In 1865, Kakure Kirishitans in Nagasaki revealed themselves to French Catholic missionaries, namely Bernard Petitjean. This astonished the world with their survival, both abroad and in Japan, where Christianity was thought to have been completely eradicated. However, even at this time in history, the Tokugawa shogunate resumed the persecution. They famously put up signboards called kosatsu, doubling down on the Keicho Edict, which had declared Christianity banned. Incidents in the village of Urakami, which are part of Nagasaki today, in which the government came and decimated the same population that had first revealed itself to Petitjean, stands out as particularly notable. This was called the Urakami Kuzure of 1867 to 1873. This I'll discuss in a later video. You see, because of its relatively recent nature in the history, the effects and repercussions of this incident still reverberate today. Then, in 1873, the Meiji government lifted the ban on Christianity under Western pressure, granting religious freedom. This was in light of the Iwakura mission, in which a number of Japanese diplomats traveled to Europe and saw how religious freedom could be effectively achieved. Protestant and Catholic missionaries arrived subsequent to this, establishing churches, schools, and universities. That said, a good number of Kakure Kirishitans who had just been recently prosecuted until last year did not join the mainstream, now legalized Christianity, and instead returned into hiding. In 1889, the Meiji Constitution guaranteed religious freedom, but the era did emphasize the newly created state Shinto, creating tensions for Christians of the era who publicly resisted emperor worship. This era is especially fascinating for the international pressure that essentially forced Japan to define itself as a nation, digging as deeply as possible into its own roots and trying to concentrate for itself a religion which could be called truly unaffected by foreign influence. As one can expect, Christianity, which had only a couple decades earlier doubled down its own image as a troublesome foreign influence, was not particularly welcomed. In the 20th century, we now have a period of growth and setbacks for Christianity. From 1900 until about 1930s, Christianity grows modestly, with Protestant denominations gaining traction via the establishment of institutions of Western learning. Universities like Doshisha University, Aoyama Gakuin, Sophia University, and what would become Rikkyo University, among others. Hospitals are those such as St. Barnabas in Osaka, Koyama Fukusei Hospital, and St. Luke's Hospital were well established by this time and even persist to this day. But though Christian institutions contribute to education, health, and social reform, Christians themselves faced suspicion as being un-Japanese during rising wartime tensions. Some notable Christian names of the era are philosopher Uchimura Kanzo, Nitobe Inazo, and politicians like Kagawa Toyohiko and Hara Takashi. Now we head to the years of 1930s through 1945. During World War II, the government pressured domestic Christians to conform to state Shinto. Some Christian leaders, like Kagawa, were arrested, and churches were forced to unite under government control one way or the other. These churches were also required to cut their international ties again during this time. From the 1945 on to the present, you see post-war constitution guaranteed full religious freedom once again. Christianity experienced a minor boom at this time, with new churches and denominations popping up. Keep in mind the contemporary atmosphere, as the frustration of post-war economics and educational reforms from foreign forces stripped the country of its grassroots ethics and attempted social reprogramming. Once again, Christianity, though welcome again in some ways, was still associated heavily with Westernness. Many newfound Christians were simply associating themselves with the fashionable nature of the occupier's religion, while others grappled with balancing their Japanese traditions and identity with their understanding of God. I point to famous Christian authors who focused on this very crisis, like Endo Shusaku, Miura Shumon, Sono Ayako, and Shimao Toshio. However, growth stalled as Japan modernized, and even today, Christianity remains a minority religion, with less than 1% of the population. It not only faces the foreignness aspect, but issues with Shinko Shukyo and contemporary competitive cults that began to pop up, starting in the Meiji period, and continued to mar the atmosphere for any hopes of proselytization. In addition, as for as common a claim as it is that the Japanese are non-religious, this is in no way the truth. For many religious practices are so deeply ingrained that they are effectively secular. While the discussion at this point becomes denominational in nature, I shall not delve into those issues as of yet, for this series shall first focus on the historical context alone. In the next video, I will go into the details of the 16th century. Who were the Jesuits, why did they come to Japan, and what was going on in Japan at the time?